You're listening to Simply the Best Sports Take, the best podcast breaking down the best stuff in sports with host Sean Bingham. His takes are so good, he dropped the mic, but then you wouldn't be able to hear him, and that would suck.
Welcome into STB Sports Take, Simply the Best Sports Podcast. I am your host, Sean Bingham. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor Podcasts, everywhere you get your podcasts. We are there. Thank you for joining us. Please hit that subscribe button, whatever platform you are on. Had some big podcasts over the last week or so, the last few days really, since the BYU-Utah rivalry game. Saw my subscriber count go up by, 30 or so people, which makes me happy. I'm on my way to 500 subscribers, then 1,000, then 10,000, then 1 million. Thank you, each and every one of you. Really appreciate it. Please share the podcast. I definitely appreciate that. Also, for those of you that are new, you can actually send in your takes. There's a link in the description of whatever platform you're on, but you can go to anchor.fm. It's STB Sports Take there, and you can actually click the link and you can record a message, send it in, and I will play it in the next podcast as long as it has to do with sports. Even if you're roasting me, shouting out your favorite team, whatever it might be, giving your take. Obviously, have a take, come strong, but you can submit your take. So, I want to give a quick shout out to Aerosport. They provided these headphones to me. They're pretty dope. Aerosport.fun. You can check them out online, aerosport.fun. Very fun backyard game. Also, just kind of an up-and-coming. It's kind of like Spike Ball, but like in the sense that it's not like Spike Ball where you're hitting it on the net, but it's like a backyard game that's also like pretty athletic. There's a lot of good variations you can do. So check out aerosport.fun for more information. But again, big thanks to them for the headphones. Okay. Fun podcast today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Utah Jazz, a little bit about the BYU Cougars, a little about the Utah Utes, but we're going to start in the NFL. It is Thursday. Thursday Night Football is upon us, and my beloved Washington football team is playing tonight against the New York Giants. For those of you that don't know, I grew up in the D.C. area, so the Washington football team, formerly the Redskins, are my favorite team in all of sports, I would say. If I could choose between, I maybe now would lean slightly towards the Utah Jazz, just because I've lived here in Utah for so long. But when I was a kid, the Redskins at the time, Washington football team, they won 3 Super Bowls in the 9 years that I lived there. So it's like in my blood to just love them. And I grew up just like cheering for champions, and it was so fun. I also happen to be a Chicago Bulls fan. That was kind of by default because the Bullets, the Washington Bullets at the time, now the Wizards. What's this with these DC teams having to change their names because they're inappropriate? The Bullets and the Redskins both had to change their names to the Wizards, which is the lamest name in the league. And then we're not sure. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers for the Red Wolves. I actually don't hate Washington football team, by the way. The more I hear it, the more I kind of like it. But anyway, both of them have to change their name. But because the Bullets sucked, I became a Bulls fan. Plus, like, my 5-year-old brain's like, Michael Jordan's the freaking man. Bulls and Bullets is, like, almost the same name. I'm cheering for these guys. So I grew up cheering for the Washington football team and the Chicago Bulls, and it was, like, championship after championship after championship after championship, and it was really, really fun. My loyalties have stayed with the Washington football team despite many years of mediocrity. My loyalties have shifted to the Utah Jazz pretty heavily. They're obviously a very good team. No titles. We'll talk about that. But anyway, the Washington football team plays tonight, and I'm going to have to miss part of it. My good friend, Casey Clyde, he's got a movie premiere. He's an actor. He's got a movie premiere tonight that I have to go to. I'm excited to go to it. It's just very unfortunate that it's the same night that Washington plays on national television for Thursday Night Football. But Washington is favored by 3.5 against division rival, the New York Giants. No Ryan Fitzpatrick. He does have a hip injury that's going to keep him out for 6 or 7 weeks. Real bummer. They paid him good money. Got excited to have him in. And the second quarter of week 1, he goes down for 7 weeks. Just kind of a bummer. But in my opinion, and I said this in Monday's podcast, I'm excited to see what Taylor Heinicke can do. Like, Taylor Heinicke came in against Tampa Bay last year in the playoffs, and he balled out. I think the kid has some real promise, some real upside, and you're getting him for dirt cheap. Let's see what he can do. Let's give him a real chance. Remember Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner was freaking bagging groceries when the Rams gave him a chance, and he became a league MVP and a Super Bowl champion and a Super Bowl MVP. It can happen. It can happen. To me, Taylor Heinicke has that type of there's at least that type of curiosity potential there. It's like, well, maybe he could maybe do it. He certainly doesn't suck. I mean, we saw what he did. That reminded me of Wayne's World. Well, it certainly does suck when he's got the vacuum cleaner, hair clipper thing on his head. Anyway, he doesn't suck. We know for sure that Taylor Heinicke can play. He's got heart. He's got leadership ability. He's going to give it his all, and he's actually got some talent. He's got some arm talent. He's got some escapability talent. He seems to know the playbook pretty well. The players seem to rally around him. The fans are rallying around him. To me, Washington has nothing to lose by going with this kid for at least a couple of weeks. They had the short week this week, so he's getting the start tonight. But he just found out he was starting Monday night, so he's had 3 days to prepare, right? So it is a division game, and it's against a pretty weak opponent. The Giants are not good. Daniel Jones is a below-average quarterback there. So they're favored by 3.5. They should win. Hopefully they win. But again, it's a short week for Taylor Heinicke at starting quarterback. Let's see what he can do this week. Then they have the long week to get ready for the Bills, which is a very tough game. They'll be at Buffalo next week. But again, they've got 10 days to prepare for that. I think you give him at least that much, at least these 2 games, before you go look at a Cam Newton. There's all this buzz about Cam Newton. Go get Cam Newton. Go get Cam Newton. Ron Rivera, of course, coached Cam Newton in Carolina. When Cam had his MVP season, they made a run to the Super Bowl together. They lost that Super Bowl, but Cam had his glory days under Ron Rivera. I think those glory days are gone. I think it's very telling that Ron Rivera isn't reaching out to him, doesn't want to go snag him, at least not yet. He said he wants to at least give Taylor Heinicke, an opportunity. You don't want to bring in Cam Newton and distract from everything. Then in 6 or 7 weeks, you want to give Taylor Heinicke 2 or 3. That gets you halfway there to where Fitzpatrick is back anyway. So I just don't see much of a point in bringing in Cam Newton because he's not going to do you a whole lot of good. You're not going to win a Super Bowl with Cam Newton. You're not even going to, I would argue, you probably won't even win a playoff game with Cam Newton. And so what's the point? He's not the future. So why make him the present? You could argue that same thing with Ryan Fitzpatrick, which is why I'm just not that bothered that Taylor Heinicke is going to be started. I never wish injury upon anybody. That's a bummer for Ryan Fitzpatrick. I do like him a lot. But he's not the future of the Washington football team. He's not the future either. Taylor Heinicke just might be. He just might be. Why not give him a chance? You've got this young, studly defense. You've got these young stud receivers and running backs. Let's see if you can add a young stud quarterback to the mix. Give him this season. See what he can do. If he goes 5-2 over the next 7 games, or even 3-4, or 4-3, something like that. That's right around just average. To me, keep him as the starter. Let him keep going. Let him build rapport with his teammates to go into next season, because Fitzpatrick is not the answer. And maybe Taylor Heinicke is. I think they should stick with him. Again, very telling that Ron Rivera is not going after Cam Newton. It could mean Cam Newton's career is over. I know Stephen A. Smith on ESPN has talked about that, and he's right. If Ron Rivera doesn't want him, why would anybody want him? So that or Cam can become more of a Carmelo Anthony, be a backup, be content with that. We'll see. So, big game tonight. Rooting for my Washington football team. Again, they're favored by 3.5. I don't know if I'm going to take that in my pick'ems or not. Last week, by the way, I'm embarrassed to say, for the first time in 7 years that I've been part of this group doing pick'ems, we do 5 games per week against the spread, not just head-to-head matchups straight up, against the spread. But for the first time in 7 seasons, I went 0-5 last week. 0-5. It was embarrassing. But again, it was against the spread. I got the winners right on 3 of the 5, but I was off on the spread. If you're going straight up on just winners, I picked for Deseret News. They're a paper here in Utah. I picked for them for an entire season. They asked me to be the expert, NFL pick'ems guy for a year. It was really fun. And I got 75% right on the season, just going head-to-head matchups. It's not that hard. The spread makes all the difference in the world. So I don't know. I don't know if I'll take Washington tonight or not. I got to look at the other games. I haven't done that yet. But I will take Washington to win. I could just see it being by 3, which would not cover the spread. So we'll see on that. Okay, moving on to BYU. BYU plays ASU this weekend. It's a late night game again. It's an 8:15 kickoff on ESPN again. Again, a Pac-12 team. Again, a ranked team. This time, Arizona State. Arizona State is favored by 3.5, much like Washington is favored by 3.5 against the Giants. But this is a huge statement game for the Cougars. If you're a BYU fan, this game matters big time. You do not want to follow up beating your in-state rival, University of Utah, Pac-12 ranked opponent at the time. You don't want to follow that up by losing a home game to a different Pac-12 team. You don't want to do it. They're already 2-0, the Cougars are, against the Pac-12, which is the only 2 games they've played this season. This is now a 3rd game against the Pac-12, a 2nd game against a ranked team. This is a huge statement game for BYU, a huge statement game for BYU. So I'm predicting BYU will win. ASU is favored by 3.5. I think BYU gets the W. I really do. I genuinely, sincerely believe that BYU is different this year. And I hope that they're not going to rest on their laurels having beaten Utah. I hope they will take that as momentum and rise to the occasion, get to 3-0, beat another ranked opponent, beat another Power 5 conference team, again in the Pac-12, and climb the rankings even further. Put the whole country on notice. BYU is here. We are deserving of the Big 12. This is a statement game for the Cougars. So I hope they can get it done. I believe they will get it done. And how cool would that be to be 3-0 against the Pac-12? Dominating the Pac-12 when you're not in the Pac-12 is so glorious if you're a BYU fan. Utah can't even dominate the Pac-12, and they're in the Pac-12. So if BYU can do it, that would just be so, so sweet. Speaking of sweet, speaking of Utah, speaking of BYU, if you haven't seen it yet, there's some podcast. Now, in their defense, I can appreciate a very low budget set. As you can see here, I'm just kind of, this isn't bad, right? I've got there's some decent stuff here. Not exactly a high budget, primetime set, but there's this podcast where there's 3 guys, or there's 2 guys and a gal. They're just sitting at like a picnic table, basically, with some ugly University of Utah, whatever it's called. What's the thing called that goes over the table? Anyway, tablecloth. Thank you. They've got a tablecloth, University of Utah tablecloth, over like a folding table, like a picnic table that folds in half kind of thing. And they've got a University of Utah backdrop, and they're like decked out in Ute gear. It's just a bunch of Ute homers. And they're complaining and whining about Kalani Sitake cheering that his team beat their rival. Like they're saying how uncool it was. And it's like the most uncool podcast you've ever seen. So them talking about what's cool and what's not cool is the most glorious display of irony I've ever seen, because their podcast could not be less cool than it is. And they're sitting there complaining that Kalani Sitake was happy that his team won the game, that he cheered and kind of danced around, a little bit when he got the water or Gatorade, dumped on him. He's a player's coach. Players love playing for him, and it's for reasons like that. So, look, you had 12 years. You had 9 straight games. We get it. You're a little bit bummed out that you can no longer call BYU the little brother, because now, guess what? They just beat you. They are now part of a Power 5 conference. We get it. You're bitter. You're salty. We get it. Just leave it at that. Don't turn into the sore loser. Don't turn into the people complaining that the head coach was excited his team won. Come on. Of course he's excited they won. It's a 9-game, 12-year losing streak he just snapped. It's a huge deal for BYU. It is a huge deal. And we can say that because we have been, and I say we because I went to BYU, I cheer for BYU over Utah. We have been the little brother. I can admit that. As a podcaster more on the BYU side, I try to stay more neutral as best I can. But as a podcaster on this side, I can admit BYU's been the little brother. I've even said the Big 12 won't be what the Pac-12 is after Oklahoma and Texas leave. I can admit all those things. So don't sit there and whine and complain and have these lame excuses as to why your team lost and why it's uncool and whatever you were saying about Kalani Sitake. The guy's a stud. Players love playing for him because he's a player's coach. He's fun to play for. And that shows it. It's things like that. He's not dancing and cheering to mock the Utes. He's not dancing and cheering for himself. He's excited for his players. And I think anybody who follows Kalani Sitake or has met him or even just watches him and listens to him in interviews understands that he is genuinely excited for his players, and that's it. That's it. So I thought it was very cool that he did that. In fact, I thought it was the opposite of what that Ute podcast did. I thought it was very cool. So anyway, speaking of Utah, they play San Diego State this week. Mighty San Diego State. Just a real tough schedule for Utah so far. Weber State and San Diego State. So they'll be 2-1 after this game. They're favored by 9. Their only loss, of course, coming to a real school in BYU. The Pac-12 this week is kind of a joke. Just had this pulled up. Arizona State plays a good game in BYU, obviously a ranked team. Colorado plays a pretty good opponent in Minnesota. That's a Big Ten school, so that one counts. But then Oregon State plays Idaho. And that game is so lopsided that Vegas is not even doing a line. You cannot bet on that game. There's no line. USC plays Washington State. That's a Pac-12 matchup. Cal plays Sacramento State, and that one also is so lopsided that there's no line. You cannot bet on it. Sacramento State and Idaho so far, okay? Washington plays Arkansas State, okay? You've never heard of them. They're favored by 16.5. Arkansas State, Sacramento State, Idaho. These are 3 of the Pac-12 opponents this week. San Diego State for Utah. Stony Brook for Oregon. Oregon is playing Stony Brook. Also no line on that one because it's so lopsided. Arizona is playing Northern Arizona. Also never heard of them. No line on that one because it's so lopsided. And then UCLA is playing Fresno State. They are favored by 11. Fresno State, Northern Arizona, Stony Brook, Arkansas State, Sacramento State, and Idaho. Those are some of the opponents the Pac-12 schools are playing this week. It's awful. It's so boring. We have to change this. We have to. Those are all going to be blowouts. It's a foregone conclusion. Why not make every game actually matter, actually interesting to watch? I hate those kind of matchups. I really do hate them. I really do. If Idaho had some if Idaho played their level of competition last year and they went 11-1 or something, then it's let's see Idaho play. Let's see them play a league up, the relegation league. I'm telling you, we got to get this movement going for relegation in college football. It would make it so much more interesting. So much more interesting. The parity in college football is literally close to 0. It is so predictable. Especially at the upper levels for the playoffs and the national champions. So predictable. And this is just an example. I had to get that off my chest. So anyway, Utah will win. BYU is not favored to win, but I think they will. Okay, now to the NBA a little bit. The NBA has announced they are strongly considering and looking at a midseason tournament in which the team that wins, every single player will receive $1 million cash prize. That's a big deal. $1 million is no small amount of money, even for the guys with $30, $40 million contracts. It just makes it that much more interesting, that much more exciting. And I, for one, am here for it. I would love it. There's a reason that football dominates. Football is extremely exciting. I would argue that basketball is as exciting. The difference is that basketball has so many games that each game matters just a little bit less than they do in football. It just does. That's just the nature of, look at the 3 big sports in the United States. Football, number 1, the fewest games. Basketball, number 2, the second fewest games. Baseball, number 3, the most games. It's simple supply and demand. If the supply is great, the demand is low. If the supply is low, the demand is great. It's that simple. The supply of football is low. We get 12, 13 games in college, now 17 games in the NFL plus playoffs. That's all you get. In basketball, you get 82 games plus multiple 7-game series in the playoffs. In baseball, you get 162 games for the regular season, and then multiple 7-game series in the playoffs. In football, you get 17 games in the NFL, 12-ish in college, and then you get a playoff where it's just one and done. You lose, you're gone. The supply and demand of football, it speaks volumes. We're so just chomping at the bit, it's Thursday night football. This is the Washington football team versus the New York Giants. 2 teams that are not very good, and the ratings will be through the roof. They just will. The ratings for this game tonight will be higher than probably the NBA Finals of last year because of the supply and demand. And so, for any individual game, I guess, for the NBA Finals, especially the bubble season where the freaking Heat and the Lakers had that, oh my gosh, that was the lamest finals ever. But especially if you compare it to that finals, the supply and demand. So, I love the idea of the NBA doing this midseason tournament because it'll jack up ratings. It'll get the players excited. Anything to get the players to play, to not sit out, to not do load management, and to play their hardest. You watch the games. The NBA playoffs is like next level awesome because nobody sits out. People play through injuries. They play through injuries they shouldn't play through. Like, you saw, you've seen that time and time again. Like last year with Anthony Davis, clearly was not ready to go, but he had to try. And, he ended up getting pulled very early in the game, but he had to try. That's what the playoffs does. And so anything that'll drive that type of mentality. Now, you wouldn't want people playing through injuries in a midseason tournament because it's not that important, but you're going to have people playing if they're healthy. You're not going to have load management, Kawhi Leonard stuff going on if there's $1 million on the line. Because now, even if you are Kawhi Leonard, you got a $40 million contract. What about the guy at the end of the bench that has a $300,000 contract or a $1 million contract? He can double his salary or triple his salary if he wins. It's going to matter immensely to those guys. And as a good teammate, you're going to want to win it for them. So anything that's going to drive ratings, that's going to drive the players to work harder, play harder, not sit out, I am all about it. I think it would be a phenomenal idea. I would love it. So I hope the NBA does it. Okay, last thing, Utah Jazz. I'm in a Utah Jazz thread with some friends. Was just texted that the Jazz are projected to finish first in the West this year by ESPN. That's great. They've got the Jazz at 55-27, then the Lakers at 53-29, so 2 games back. Then 2 games back of that at 51 wins, they have the Suns, and then a game back the Nuggets, Mavericks, Warriors, Clippers, Blazers, Grizzlies, Pelicans. That's kind of the top 10 that they think will make the playoffs or the play-in game scenario to get into the playoffs. So that's great. That's all fine and dandy. I don't necessarily disagree with this. I think the Lakers will probably finish a little bit higher. I'd be surprised if the Lakers don't finish the number 1 seed in the West. But the Jazz will be right there, 1 or 2. It's going to be very, very close. There's a lot of good teams. The Suns, obviously, were right there this last year. But none of this matters. All that matters is the playoffs. All that matters is the playoffs. And when there's a 7-game series, home court advantage is like barely important. It's not like football again. We're talking about supply and demand. It's not like football where you get 1 game on your home field. This is a 7-game series where you get at least 3, if you can win 1 or 2, you get at least 3 on your home court. And in a 7-game series, the better team always wins. They just do. Unless there's some major injury, but in that case, like injuries are part of the game, still the better team won. So in a 7-game series, the better team's going to win. The home court advantage is a very minimal thing. And LeBron James has proven that over the last decade as he continues to go to NBA Finals and win playoff series and is frequently does not have home court advantage. So none of this really matters. I love that the ESPN is looking at the Jazz to be the top seed. I think that's great. I hope they do it. But what I care most about is reaching a conference finals. I'm not expecting an NBA Finals appearance this year. I think the Lakers are just going to be too good. If they're healthy, we will not beat them. The Jazz will not get past a big 3 of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook. They just won't. I think Russell Westbrook is going to prove to everybody wrong that's hating on him. I think he's going to prove to be a fantastic addition as a big 3, third offensive option on that team. I think he's going to provide open looks because that guy can drive and dish like nobody else. I think he's going to be a stud for the Lakers, and I kind of honestly hope he is. I like Russell Westbrook. I just do. He plays so freaking hard, and it feels like everybody hates him, and I just like to stick up for people that get hated on. For what? Like, why do you hate on him? The guy averages a triple-double year in and year out, gives his heart and soul to the game, doesn't load manage. What is there to not like about him? I don't get it. So I'm rooting for him. Certainly rooting for the Jazz over him, though. I just think that if all 3 of those guys, LeBron, AD, and Westbrook, are healthy, I just don't see Donovan, Rudy, and Mike Conley overcoming that. I think a conference championship appearance would be fantastic for the Jazz. That would be a tremendous step in the right direction. Let the Lakers get a little bit older and a little bit more banged up, and maybe the next year we get into a title contention. Or injuries happen all the time. They happened last year. The Jazz could benefit there. The Jazz are right there. They're knocking on the door of a title, but they're just a step behind the obvious Brooklyn Nets and Los Angeles Lakers, in my opinion. That's all the time I have for today. Enjoy the weekend of football. Go Utes. Go Cougars. Go Washington football team. That's right, I said go Utes. I want the state of Utah to look good. Plus, the more Utah wins now, the better it looks for BYU for having beat them. I'm out. Peace.
Thanks for hanging with Simply the Best Sports Take. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and check out STBSportsTake.com. Simply the best in sports.
'Cause we are